So I've recently been watching the Civil War series by Ken Burns on Netflix, the one that was on PBS a few years ago. Has anybody seen that? Oh man, it is so cool. I remember as a kid growing up in school, I really liked history, but especially the Civil War. But as I've been watching this film, it's kind of changed my perspective a little bit. I've been really moved by the fact that this Civil War, it was the bloodiest, most horrible conflict America ever engaged in. It was a war with ourselves. Friends and families were torn apart by opposing sides. Brothers were fighting brothers sometimes. But Abraham Lincoln, in my opinion, was one of the greatest presidents of all time. Not because of the policies that he passed or that he was on the winning side of this great war. No, it was because of his compassion and his understanding of the American people, both black and white, during the war. In Lincoln's second inaugural address speech, we're reminded of the topic that we're going to be talking about today, how evil can blind us and tear us apart. Lincoln talks in this speech about how slavery was really the underlying issue of the war, and it nearly tore the Union apart. And then he goes on to comment, and we heard a little bit there, with the irony of God being on both sides. Let me read part of that speech to you. It says, "Neither party expected for the war the magnitude or the duration which it has already attained. Neither anticipated that the cause of the conflict might cease with, or even before the conflict itself should cease. Each looked for an easier triumph and a result less fundamental and astounding. Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces. But let us judge not, that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been fully answered. Or answered fully, sorry. And as I'm watching this incredible documentary, and if you haven't had a chance to watch it, I'd really encourage you to go watch it. I'm just thinking, how can people be so blind? Here, our country, it's divided. People went to war and lives were lost, and neither side was in the right. Looking back, it seems pretty clear that power and economic gain was a major motivating factor for enslaving a race of people. And it was self-serving and wrong. And yet, as Lincoln pointed out, both sides read the same Bible. Both prayed to the same God. And both judged the other side as the evil side. All you have to do is look around our world today, and you realize just how common this thinking is. We see it everywhere in the Middle East, Africa, Ireland, here in America, here in our own homes, here in our own marriages and relationships. I often see the same tendency with married couples that are headed for divorce. Both see so clearly what's wrong with the other one. And both have very good reasons to justify their own actions. But somebody's blinded to the truth by their own judgments. And it's usually both of them. And we can say, welcome to humanity. All people everywhere. We all can be so blinded to our own wrongs and our own shortcomings. And yet, we can have this uncanny 2020 clarity on what's wrong with others. I remember when one of our girls was headed to college, the school sent this questionnaire to determine, kind of roommate compatibility. And so they asked these questions. Do you make your bed regularly? Do you consider yourself a neat person? Do you regularly pick up after yourself? And our daughter checked yes to all of them. Her mom saw what she checked, and knowing how far from the truth it was, she asked, "Why did you lie?" She said, "What? And have them put me in a room with a slob?" We're all blinded to the truth about ourselves. And every married couple knows that their spouse has been far more inconsiderate than they have been. Every child knows his brother or sister has done more to start the fight than he or she did. Every worker knows his coworkers are more lazy and less productive than they are. It's like bad breath. We can smell it on each other. We just can't ever tell when we have it. In this series about how to kill a relationship in 30 days, we're talking about dwelling on what's wrong. And in relationships, that can be the number one relationship killer. But it's also true at work and in friendships as well. And if you're here and just kind of catching in on this topic, it's even for you single people as well. So just because you're maybe not married in a relationship, don't check out of this series, because it's not just about marriage. It's about becoming a loving, growing person who can make any relationship last. So just apply what you hear to how you deal with close friends, coworkers, family members, if you're not married or in a relationship right now. In this series, we've been using this Prepare, Enrich study that we're basing this series on, and it's been validated by 3 million couples across all cultures. And they found this: 83% of troubled marriages said, "My partner is too negative or critical." 80% of troubled marriages said, "My partner makes comments that put me down." But on the positive side, 79% of happily married couples said, "My partner does not make comments that put me down." See, being negative, critical, putting the other person down, it kills a relationship faster than anything except bad communication and inflexibility. We talked about that over the last couple weeks. If you weren't here, you can go out to our website at gatewaybranson.org and you can watch the past 2 weeks' messages. Or if you have our Gateway app, you can catch those messages on that app. We can learn to be people capable of healthy, loving relationships, long-lasting relationships, by understanding ourselves, and then by working on becoming a person who builds others up. Now, to do that, we have to see where we're at. So we're going to take a little relational IQ test to see if we are a builder or a burner. So I want you to do a little self-evaluation here. We'll put it up here on the screen. If somebody heard all of your thoughts, you'd say they were A, mostly negative, B, often negative, C, sometimes positive, or D, mostly positive. So don't shout them out loud. I don't really want to know. All right, second question. What you hear in your head when you mess up is A, personally condemning, B, self-critical, C, comforting, or D, reassuring and hopeful. Some of us grew up with more negative and critical views, and others of us with a more positive type view. If you assessed yourself on the negative critical end, then this is probably an area you can start working on right now, because your negative critical spirit, it will harm your long-term relationships. Now, critical thinking works really well when you're problem solving, or if you're in medicine, for instance. You know, if you go to the doctor, you want your doctor to think, I know what's wrong with them and I can fix it. You don't want your doctor saying, you know, I don't think that massive abnormal cancerous growth on your face looks that bad. But who am I to judge? Let's just be positive and hope for the best. We don't want our doctor doing that. We want our doctor to be an analytical thinker resolving that. But when it comes to relationships, most people don't want to live with a negative, analytical, critical partner. They can get that at work. They want to live with basically a happy person who encourages them and believes the best. Now, for some of us who grew up at the Simon Cowell School of Encouragement, it's a growing opportunity. And I have to constantly work on this one. I'm kind of wired as being an analytical thinker. In fact, it was my analytical, critical, and negative comments that helped drive Amy and I to the brink of divorce. I had some growing and changing that I had to do our first years of marriage. And I still have to be reminded by Amy of some of those things today. But here's what helped me, and it can help you too. See, I realized I had a choice in my attitude. It's not up to the other person or my circumstances. It's my responsibility to have a good attitude. I can choose it. And actually, John, last week, he touched on that. Two things helped me see that. One was realizing that it was a commandment in the Bible. If you didn't know, the Bible is broken up into an Old Testament and a New Testament. It consists of 66 books with chapters and verses. The Old Testament of the Bible is about life on earth before Jesus came, and the New Testament of the Bible is about life on earth after Jesus came. These separate books are made up of chapters and verses, and really they're a collection of eyewitness accounts throughout history. If you don't have a Bible and you've kind of always wanted to dive into one but didn't know where to start, we have free, easy to read Bibles over there that we give out. Just go grab one off the counter or ask them for one. Also in that Gateway app, there's actually a link to a Bible like Jason said in there, and so you can pull that up. You can follow along today. If you don't have a Bible, it's not a big deal. We're going to put the verses up on the screen. But this commandment that I was talking about, it's found in the New Testament of the Bible, in the book of Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. It says, "And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice all you learned and received from me, everything you heard from me and saw me doing. Then the God of peace will be with you." See, we have a choice on what we focus on. Whether we only see what's missing or what's wrong, or we see the possibilities and the good in others. It's like programming a computer. We program our minds to have more of a negative, critical view, or we program our minds to interpret things with more of a positive, hopeful view. And it's up to each of us. And I realized that I needed to train my mind to think differently. In the New Testament book of Romans, chapter 12, verse 2, Scripture tells us, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. See, Scripture tells us that what we think about, what we dwell on, the thoughts we meditate on, they They shape or change the way we think. Our thoughts will either be in line with what God says is true, or our thoughts will be in line with the world's view, the world's standards. And that can actually destroy us. And science agrees. Studies have now shown that repeated consumption of porn causes the brain to literally rewire itself. It triggers the brain to pump out chemicals and form new nerve pathways, leading to profound and lasting changes in our brains. See, the brain is made up of these 100 billion special nerves called neurons, and they carry electrical signals back and forth between parts of the brain and then out to the rest of our body. So a few weeks ago, I told you I've been learning how to play the guitar. So imagine you're learning to play an E chord on the guitar. Your brain sends a signal to your hand telling it what to do. And as that signal zips along from neuron to neuron, those activated nerve cells start to form connections. If you ever watch Saturday morning cartoons, it would say because neurons that fire together wire together. Those newly connected neurons, though, they form what's called neural pathways. And think of a neural pathway like a trail in the woods. Every time someone uses that trail, it gets a little wider, a little bit more worn, it becomes a little more permanent. So every time a message travels down a neural pathway, the pathway gets stronger to the point where you don't even have to think about playing that E chord, it just happens automatically. But see, that pathway can also become a rut. And only by changing the way you think can you change the pathway. So how does all this science of neural pathways and thought relate to relationships? We are in a spiritual battle. Each one of us is in a spiritual battle, but it happens in the mind. Those thoughts, they shape how your marriage goes, how your relationships go, how you treat those around you. And look what it tells us in the New Testament book of 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 4 and 5. We use God's mighty weapons, not worldly weapons, to knock down the strongholds of human reasoning and to destroy false arguments. We destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God. We capture their rebellious thoughts and teach them to obey Christ. See, this passage of Scripture, it says that you're in a civil war. It says a civil war is going on and you're in the middle of it. But it's not a conventional war waged with guns and cannons to gain territory. It's a battle for your mind. See, evil thoughts, they want to drive a wedge between you and your relationship. And even if you don't believe that, you know that the more you dwell on something wrong with your spouse, maybe the person you work with, somebody around you, it soon gets to be all you see, feel, or think about. It shapes your brain and your behavior. You get stuck in this neural rut. So see, you have to pay attention. You have to take those thoughts captive, especially the ones aimed at dividing you from your spouse or from any relationship. Right now, your mind is kind of working like this.
I have no idea what this guy on stage is talking about. I have a great relationship with my husband. I just wish he would put his dishes away without me asking to. He never does it. I can't stand it. I wish he would change. Who am I kidding? My relationship sucks. I wonder if anyone would notice if I got up to go to the bathroom. That breakfast was good this morning, but I hope they have bacon next week. Hey, turn your phone off in church, you jerk. Oh, I shouldn't be thinking that in church. I wonder if God's going to strike me with lightning. Ugh, this guy is still talking. Is everyone pity laughing at his jokes? Wonder if they're going to let that cute sound guy talk again. Caleb, his message was awesome. Maybe I can get him to take me to lunch today. I'm so hungry. Where should I go to lunch? El Patio. Queso. That's a voice from God. Oh, wait. Oh, I'm paying attention.
See, that's your mind. You're always having these series of thoughts. They're going on all the time. But we don't always have the time or the attention to realize just how powerful they are. Some of those thoughts, they can move us forward towards the life God intended for us, to build up others and those around us. Other thoughts are subtle, but evil. They're not yours. They're trying to steal, kill, and destroy your relationships. If you resist them, they'll cease. If you dwell on them, you'll be shaped by them. They'll create a pathway. The way to change it is to take responsibility for what thoughts we let in and dwell on, training our mind to see the positive in people and situations around us. So how do we become people who have healthy, strong, lasting relationships? Jesus actually gives us wisdom in his Sermon on the Mount in the New Testament book of Matthew, chapter 7, verses 1 and 2, on how to start this. He says, "Do not judge others, and you will not be judged, for you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged." See, judging others, it blinds us to the truth about ourselves. And frequently, it does damage to those around us. It keeps us from humbly listening to God and changing the only person we are responsible to change, ourselves. See, God alone has the right to judge the heart, the motives, the value, and the worth of another person. We don't have that right. Jesus wants us to stop and reflect on our own actions when we find ourselves judging and criticizing others. What we need is greater humility, and that's what Jesus is getting at. What we need is for God to remove our blinders so that we can clearly see ourselves. And if all of us would truly judge ourselves clearly and allow God to access us, to change us, we'd all be better off. And that's what Jesus is saying when he goes on in this passage in verses 3 and 5. And why worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying to your friend, "Let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye," when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite, first get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. See, Jesus is saying we can be so blind. We can complain about everyone else's breath, even though we can't smell our own. We can so easily become highly critical of those around us, frustrated when they won't change, but we are not nearly as eager to let God change us. We're hypocritical. And by the way, you're not alone. Every human being alive is hypocritical. And that is why Jesus tells us humility is so necessary. It's so important. Jesus says that once you've taken the big ugly board, the big ugly stick out of your own eye, then you'll truly be helpful to another person who often needs our help to get the speck out of their eye. See, that log that's in our eye is our judgmental attitude. It's that attitude toward others. It's not seeing ourselves clearly. But when we do see ourselves clearly, then we're able to help that other person. We're able to correct each other. But only if we do it in a loving way, with a loving attitude. I'm sure that you've noticed when you back off and stop trying to manipulate the other person, and you really try to show them respect, that you end up showing them love by treating them as you would want them to treat you. And when you do that, you become their ally, somebody who's on their side rather than their enemy. See, when people don't feel threatened, but they feel loved and supported, then there is this very freeing possibility of looking honestly at the speck. What is it that maybe can be changed? Because now I feel loved and cared for. I don't feel criticized or put down. And then that person can often help you see your own speck. But you do this by asking, not by judging, not by condemning, not by blaming, not by forcing your will on the other person, but by asking. And when you do that, it will transform your relationships. See, when something bugs us and we have this sense of a judging, critical attitude rising up in us, we need to ask. We need to ask God to help us see ourselves clearly. Help us to be willing to change. Ask God to help that person feel loved through you. And then go and ask that person for changes you think will benefit themselves or the relationship as a whole. I think if we did that, so many marriages and relationships could be saved. If we would just focus on asking God to help us see ourselves clearly and change us as much as we want to change the other person. So, this week, I want you to do a little experiment. Every time you see something that needs fixing or changing or correcting in another person, I want you to stop and pray this. And we'll put it up here on the slide. I want you to pray, God, show me what you want to change in me to love others as you intended. Let me be willing to change like I want this person to change. If all of us did that, all of our problems would be solved, wouldn't they? Yes, they would, Brian. So that's your homework for the week, is to look at that other person as you would want to be looked at. To not look at their flaws, but look at your own. Get that log out of your eye. The band's going to come up here and they're going to sing some songs to God and for God and about God. You can sit, you can stand. We'll put the words up on the screen so you can sing along. But while the band plays these songs, I want you to pray about where God wants you to grow. During this first song, ask yourself, where does he want your thoughts to dwell? How can you be encouraging to others? How can God change you instead of asking him to change others? We don't pass an offering bucket here. This is just our gift to you. If Gateway is your church home, we give out of the gratitude of what God has done for us so that we can help others. We have buckets set up in the back there and giving stations. You can also go online to our website and you can set up recurring payment there, recurring gifts there. If you'd like somebody to pray with you and for you today, we'll have people on both sides of the room that would love to do that. Maybe today is the first day you've decided, you know what, I'm going to try this Jesus thing and see if he can help me look at myself and see if that will change the relationship that I'm in. If that's you, be sure to tell these guys over here on the sides. They would love to pray with you about that first step with Jesus. Band's going to play these songs, and then I'll come back up and close us out.